Would you ever think that a man who was physically attractive, had a charming personality, and worked for the Washington State Republican Party would be considered one of the most horrific serial killers of all time? The topic of my speech today is Ted Bundy. I chose to speak about Ted Bundy because I find it interesting that a man who seemed to be so normal actually was a vicious serial killer. I wanted to inform my audience to never judge a book by its cover, because even the people who seem so typical and ordinary can actually be your worst nightmare. After reading research and watching a movie on Netflix called Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, I feel confident in giving my speech on Ted Bundy. In my speech today, I'm going to tell you about Ted Bundy and how he grew up, how he killed his victims, and inform you how he got caught. The first main point I would like to discuss in my speech today is how Ted Bundy grew up and what made him into the person he became. Ted Bundy's real name is Theodore Robert Bundy. He was born on November 24th, 1946, and died on January 24th, 1989. Bundy had a difficult childhood. His mother, Eleanor Cowell, wanted to put him up for adoption, but her father, Sam Cowell, wanted him to join their family in Philadelphia. There, he began thinking his mother was actually his sister. Bundy didn't get along with his stepdad, and he didn't know his real father either. His mother married John Bundy when he was 6 years old, giving Ted his last name. Before they got married, Ted's last name was Nelson. As Bundy grew older, friends witnessed him provoking his stepdad, who would strike back in frustration. According to Sarah Kettler, who wrote an article called Inside Ted Bundy's Troubled and Disturbing Childhood, Ted Bundy's aunt woke up one night, when he was just a toddler, to find him holding knives near her. Bundy and his mother never had a great relationship. She actually had 4 more children besides him, so her attention was divided. Bundy expressed a feeling of being unloved. There are different versions of how Bundy learned the truth about his birth. According to a physiologist who interviewed Bundy, he said that he found his birth certificate and saw the space for father marked unknown. Bundy resented his mother for this because he felt he had been humiliated. Ted Bundy's actions are unjustifiable, but I believe his childhood is a part of what made him who he is. Now that I have told you about Ted Bundy and his childhood, let me tell you about his victims and how he killed them. Ted Bundy sexually assaulted and killed several young women in numerous states between 1974 and 1978. Although he confessed to killing 36 women in numerous states, experts believe it was closer to 100 or more. Many believe that his murderous rampage started around 1974 when women in the Seattle area and nearby Oregon went missing. Stories circulated that the women were last seen with a dark-haired man named Ted. An article I read stated that Ted often lured his victims into his car by pretending he was hurt and asking them for help. One of Bundy's more well-known murders was when he escaped from jail the second time and broke into the Chi Omega sorority house and attacked 4 girls, killing 2 of them. Ted actually had a girlfriend named Elizabeth Cloper, and they were together for 6 years. She started to suspect Bundy of his crimes and eventually went to the police. Now that I have told you about Ted Bundy's victims, let me tell you about how he got caught and went to jail. Ted Bundy was able to escape jail on more than one occasion. On August 16, 1975, Bundy was arrested after a Utah Highway Patrol officer pulled him over due to being suspicious of Bundy's car being parked at a house where 2 young women lived. When he was pulling him over, Bundy tried to evade the cop, but eventually pulled over. The patrol officer found handcuffs, a ski mask, and pantyhose with holes cut out. Bundy was then arrested and charged with evading the police and possession of burglary tools. Shortly after, Bundy escaped jail by jumping out of a window from 2 stories. It had been 10 minutes before anyone realized he was missing, and roadblocks were put at both ends of Aspen, and they searched every car that left town. Ted was eventually caught 6 days after his escape when a police officer pulled over a car that was swerving in the road. It ended up being Bundy, and he had stolen the car in Aspen. Unfortunately, this was not the only time Bundy escaped from jail. When Ted returned to prison, he started losing weight. He had cut a hole in the ceiling big enough for him to crawl out of. He crawled through the ducting, went into a jailer's apartment who wasn't there, and stole civilian clothes to blend in. This is the second time Bundy escaped police custody in Colorado. When he escaped, he took a train to Michigan, drove south to Atlanta, and got on a bus to Florida. Ted Bundy was arrested in Pensacola, Florida, after a police officer discovered the car he was driving had been stolen. Bundy refused to identify himself. In July 1979, Bundy was sentenced to death in the electric chair. In my speech today, I hope to have informed you about Ted Bundy's childhood, his victims, and how he got caught. Ted Bundy was perceived by society as a normal man, but in reality was a serial killer who lured his victims in with his good looks and charm.